From Ticker News with Aaron Young, this is Hot Shots.
Hello and thanks for joining me. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says he will resign if it means peace for Ukraine and membership to NATO. It comes as Germans elect Conservatives to power, with the far-right party coming second. So what does it mean for the power of balance right across Europe, and should the world be worried about Germany turning right? We'll be joined by the airport economist Professor Tim Harcourt in a moment to answer this question. Plus, Donald Trump's tariffs causing panic right around the world, but today we'll find out why one Aussie business could actually benefit from Trump's steel tariffs, even if Australia isn't exempt. And the NRL heads to Vegas once again. Could the 5-year commitment to take league stateside already be paying off? This is Hot Shots. Let's get started. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is pushing for improved financial terms and security guarantees regarding a minerals deal with the United States. He criticises the current US offer as financially burdensome, especially as Ukraine marks 3 years since the onset of full-scale invasion by Russia. Tensions escalated last week, with both Zelensky and President Trump exchanging heated remarks over the situation. Zelensky reiterating that elections cannot occur during wartime and expressed willingness to resign if it leads to peace or NATO membership for Ukraine. Meanwhile, President Trump is defending the deal today, calling it a crucial partnership for US aid in Ukraine.
And we had a deal based on rare earth and things, but they broke that deal. But they broke it 2 days ago. We had a deal because I said, we're spending $350 billion and Europe gets their money back in the form of a loan, and we don't. We're just giving the money hand over fist. That's the Biden administration for you.
Germany's Christian Democratic Union is set to secure victory in the latest election, promising a rapid coalition formation. Early estimates show the CDU leading with nearly 29% of the vote, despite significant gains by the far-right AfD at about 20%. The Christian Democratic Union now faces the urgent challenge of revitalising Germany's sluggish economy and addressing rising geopolitical tensions amid a fragmented parliament. As the party navigates potential ruling alliances and allegiances, pressures from the US regarding cooperation with the AfD complicate its position. So, should the world be worried? Let's bring in Professor Tim Harcourt from UTS, host of the Airport Economist channel right here on Ticker. That is the first question. Should the world be worried after this election over the weekend?
Well, I think the world's got to be always concerned about Germany, given what an important economy and country it is to Europe and to the world. Although, I mean, the election results were not really a surprise. It was expected that the Christian Democratic Union coalition would swing back. But if you notice the AfD, the far-right party, most of their vote is in the former East Germany, which suggests to me that it's the economy stupid again. The relative wealth of the West, or what used to be the West compared to the East, is causing a movement to the AfD in that part of Germany.
Angela Merkel, the longtime Chancellor of Germany, said in her recent book, her autobiography, "If you can't blame anything else, just blame me," as I'm sure they would. It seems that the immigration issue has been a massive one. Over 1 million refugees were brought in from Syria. That caused a lot of anger, as we know. Let's hear from one of the members of the AfD party, a senior MP, about their thoughts on immigration.
What we mean is that everyone who is in Germany and has not a legal status has to leave. Everyone who's illegally in Germany has to leave. And everyone who has a legal status, this status has to be checked and has most likely to be removed, specifically when it comes to those asylum seekers or refugees from Syria and Afghanistan, because they came here, those from Syria came here because of Assad. Now Assad has fallen. The Syrians in Germany, they have celebrated the fall of Assad. So there is no more need and no more reason for them to stay here. So we expect them to leave our country voluntarily. And if they don't want to leave voluntarily, we have to, move them back.
Okay, obviously concerns about that. We think about what happened to the Jews back in the late 30s and early 40s of the last century. This is the first time since World War II that a far-right party has done so well in the elections. We'll talk economy in a moment, because there is so much to talk about, particularly with the car industry and Germany being the manufacturing hub of Europe for such a long time. But when it comes to immigration, those views there about the idea of once a crisis in a country is over, the refugees should go back. Has that been done anywhere in the world? I think about my own family who came from Spain due to the Franco administration back in the 1970s. He was deposed a year after they arrived back in 1973. And so therefore, should everyone go back once the problem in their country ends? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, interesting point. I think, Aaron, I think all my ancestors were either Jewish refugees escaping the pogroms in the 19th century or convicts. So they either came here illegally or they did something illegal to come here. But it's quite rare. I mean, we know that most people who come to a place will settle and make a new life most of the time. And it's interesting you bring up Angela Merkel. I mean, she was a very successful Chancellor, originally from East Germany herself. But she did blot her copybook with the Syrian issue, and there are a lot of rapes and murders of local German women by Syrian refugees, which was an issue, and that went all the way through the election. We saw the events in Munich, we saw attacks on the Holocaust Museum, we saw all sorts of problems from asylum seekers, and that really played into the hands of the AfD in East Germany. And interestingly, Aaron, I mean, some social democrats, such as in Denmark, they've taken a really hard line on immigration and asylum seekers and crime, and they've actually been pretty successful as a social democratic party. So it's interesting that the German social democrats didn't quite learn that lesson from their Scandinavian neighbours.
Nie wieder means never again in German, and it is something that they take very seriously, because right through Parliament, right through every aspect of German life is the term never again. We think about some of the propaganda films that the American soldiers watched heading in, where they said the Germans will rise again if they're not kept down. This is what they were told in the early 1940s, I think in about 44. So if you look at the fact that the German far right is now in second position, and let's be clear, their policies are not that of the Nazi Party, although obviously when we hear far right German, we have a tendency to put the two together, as has been the case. Talk to us about some of the economic issues, because we know about the immigration issues, about those Syrian refugees. The refugee problem has been a problem right throughout Europe. It's one of the key reasons the UK decided on Brexit as well, was to try and get away from that. But talk to us about what's been happening with the economy of Germany.
Well, yeah, you're quite right, your point about never again, and I don't think there's any country that's been better about educating people about the Holocaust and anti-Semitism than the Germans. You meet so many, I meet young Germans on kibbutz in Israel, and they're all very clearly well educated on these issues. But the anti-Semitism is coming from the left in many cases in Europe, and it's related to fundamentalist Islam rather than the Nazis on the right. So it's actually quite a different kettle of fish, and I think the old right is taking advantage of that in East Germany. On the economy, and I think you're quite right, I mean, that's what's been driving, when you look at the electoral map of Germany, you see that relatively impoverished East Germany, the economy's been driving a lot of this. The Germans were very reliant on oil from Russia. They've had to cut that off, that dependence. A large German delegation came to Australia. I interviewed them for the Airport Economist on the prospects of hydrogen, and they've got a real difficulty with their energy needs, and that's of course driving up costs in the great German manufacturing machine. So net zero is really hard for Germany, and that's driving a lot of the economic difficulties that is now, as we've seen in the election, leading to social unrest.
It is such a good point, because we know that right through Europe there is anger about net zero. We are seeing it across the UK as well. German power is now 5 times more expensive as other countries. They walked away from nuclear after Fukushima, but where they went to has become very expensive, and they're in that transition. It's become a tale for Western democracies, hasn't it?
Well, you're right to point that out, Aaron. I mean, that they walked away from nuclear. Compare them to the French, that is, committed to its nuclear power. They haven't got the same issues with the high cost of energy that Germany has. So net zero is really harming the German economy, amongst other issues, and therefore harming the social compact that Germany built up after the war, after the horrors of the Holocaust, to try and have a good society. Now that's breaking down.
Well, you think about when Greece went through its financial crisis 5 or so years ago, everyone turned to Germany and said, help pay, because the German economy was just humming along. It was absolutely the powerhouse of Europe when it comes to economic achievement. When I think about German manufacturing, I think of VW. Here's how their share price is looking over the past 5 years, on a downward trajectory. I would wonder whether a bigger threat to the German economy is Syrian refugees or Chinese EVs.
Isn't it interesting? I mean, as you say, Volkswagen means the car of the people when it was dominant. And during the Greek financial crisis, I think there was going to be a movie out, My Big Fat Greek Debt, because basically the European pact was to say, why should Fritz, the auto worker in Germany, pay for the pension of a Greek public servant? That's what the debate became about. But there's issues with EVs, not just from China, but from India, and also the ability that German manufacturing did to move a lot of their plants to the Czech Republic and so on. That's not working out for them quite the way they thought.
All right, you have raised a fantastic point. I was about to move on, but I have to ask you this, because if the car worker in Germany asks, why am I paying for old mate in Greece to be hanging around having a great time and the pension funds there, does the rise of a far-right Conservative Party and far-right party in Germany, we are seeing similar things happening in France as well. The UK obviously had Brexit. Are we now looking at a potential breakup of the European Union because the ones who are paying are becoming so frustrated with the ones who aren't paying their way that they're essentially electing parties to try and stop it? What happens next?
Yeah, look, I think it's definitely under pressure, and also you notice the Chancellor-elect. So Germany's got to be less dependent on the United States now in terms of defence spending. So you're going to have pressures to basically pick up their share of the defence budget, because Trump has said we're not going to pay the bill anymore. And you've got the pressures within Europe where we don't want to pay Spiros' pension in Athens. So that's a bit of a problem as well. So you've got those pressures, and that's why you've seen this electoral result, I think.
Very much so,
for instance.
Yeah. Aussie business BlueScope Steel could benefit from Donald Trump's steel tariffs even if Australia isn't exempt. BlueScope's CEO has highlighted a 20% increase in steel prices since the tariffs were announced, indicating a positive outlook for their US operations. While there are risks from potential steel influx from China, the company remains optimistic about the United States market. And Australian Treasurer Jim Chalmers says he will raise the Trump administration's brutal blanket tariffs on foreign steel and aluminium when he meets his new US counterpart in Washington. He's on his way over. Comes as Donald Trump spruiks the power of tariffs.
Word tariff is my favorite word in the dictionary. We were the richest relatively from, think of this, from 1870 to 1913. That was our richest because we collected tariffs from foreign countries that came in and took our jobs and took our money, took our everything. But they charged tariffs, and we had so much money they set up the 1887. Think of that, a long time ago, 1887 Tariff Commission. It was a commission of very important people to determine where we should spend all of the tremendous, vast wealth that we had. We had so much wealth. Wouldn't it be nice today? Of course, now we give it away to transgender this, transgender that. Everybody gets a transgender operation. It's just wonderful. No, we give it away like to crazy things. But in those days, it was different. It was a different world. It was a different country. But we were very rich because of tariffs.
Only Trump could link tariffs with transgender issues. Now, Whitlam-esque is the way that Peter Dutton has described Albanese's lifeline to Whyalla, given everything that is happening there with the bailout plan. It comes at a time where I was watching a documentary over the weekend about Australia's economy. Out of the OECD, we are one of the less performing when it comes to complexity of our economy. We just dig it up and send it offshore. in terms of complexity. Since the 1940s and 50s, we have dropped from being one of the world's most complex industries and societies to simply relying on digging it up and then hoping that the proceeds will pay for everything else. What Trump is proposing here, essentially this blanket tariffs on steel, if Australia is caught up, could really be a huge problem for Australia.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think the head of Hewlett-Packard, Carly Perini, came out during the Sydney Olympics and she said if Australia should stop digging stuff up and farming, and it should close them all down and sell software like Taiwan, or the dollar will hit, I think she said 30 cents US.
And which direction is the dollar heading to right now?
Yeah, well, we had the biggest terms of trade gain in our history after she said that. But look, I think what that probably misses is that there's, you go to Argentina, and most of the software in the wine industries from Australia. You go to different mining sites in India and Southeast Asia, and a lot of the technology in the mining sector comes from Australia. So in some ways you have complexity within mining and farming as well as other industries. But with respect to steel, it's interesting. I mean, BlueScope has said it's not cheering the tariffs on, but it has pointed out that it's probably going to benefit because BlueScope is the 5th largest steel maker in America, employs 400 American steelworkers. So I think for them, because they've, I guess 30 years ago, decided to be based in the places they invest in, they're actually going to benefit from the tariffs, although they do have some exports to the West Coast to make collarbone that could be affected. So it swings and roundabouts with tariffs. But I mean, the point of the time of prosperity in the late 19th century that President Trump was talking about, they had tariffs. They also had very high immigration then, and that was part of their prosperous story, which is a bit of a paradox.
Yeah, very much so. When you hear coming to take our jobs and things, we've heard that one before. It seems a bit of a loophole that BlueScope could be doing okay because it happens to have steel manufacturing in the United States, but it's just listed here in Australia. That feels like they're kind of cheating. When you have a look, we were talking in our previous conversation about net zero. Given that the current administration, Albanese's government in Australia, is pushing for net zero, there may be a coalition with the Greens, given how bad the polls look for an April election for Labor to retain power. It seems that the net zero path seems to be the most likely. What does that mean for Australian steel? And to put it in very simple terms, what's a bigger threat to Australia's steel and aluminium smelters, Donald Trump's tariffs or Anthony Albanese's push for net zero?
Well, that's right. They've got it coming at both ends. And I mean, I interviewed Mr. Gupta for the Airport Economist Climate Innovation show, and it seemed that he was able to be quite effective at picking up government subsidies for net zero, but he hadn't produced any steel, and that seemed to be the worry, and that's been driving up high prices in South Australia, for instance. And yet, on the other hand, South Australia had Elon Musk with his battery doing quite good things in South Australia. So, yeah, I think that's an issue, and. I mean, I think the fact, he hasn't put a lot of detail to it, but I think the fact that the opposition leader, Peter Dutton, has put nuclear on the table as an option should be considered seriously by policymakers and the electorate. I mean, it's not a partisan thing. I mean, Bob Hawke proposed nuclear power when he was, he was a great Labor Prime Minister. So in some ways, the net zero thing does need all options to be considered, given what we've seen in Germany and elsewhere.
I don't have any ideological beliefs on this, but as a journalist and someone interested in a strong economy, there are some glaring problems about net zero, which is that there just doesn't appear to be a plan, an actual plan for baseload power. I'm a strong supporter of renewables because it sounds and feels much better like something we should be doing, but so does not drinking alcohol. And yet we still find ourselves every now and then having a tipple. The idea of shifting our entire economy to something that, and I'm talking about the UK, I'm talking about Germany here as well, it seems to be crazy to be able to do that when you don't yet have a plan, an ideological belief based on something that doesn't yet exist. What's your viewpoint on that? Because, as you say, nuclear seems to be the option, but because of the accidents like Fukushima, Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, there's a lot of panic that how would Australia even start a nuclear industry, given our universities aren't teaching the science at the moment. We haven't even been given the ability to have the power yet. How would it actually work? And while Europe is obviously talking a lot about these ideas of small reactors, the bureaucrats are holding them all up right through Europe, right through the UK. They're not actually being built.
Yeah, it's interesting, Keir Starmer been very strong on nuclear recently. Look, I think on this issue, I'm a bit of a put the green back in the green and gold, Aaron. I mean, when we looked at the Airport Economists Climate Innovation Show, we actually did see great renewable industries in Australia building back from the bushfires with renewable material. We saw a lot of renewable energy doing quite well in Australia's relationships with India and China and ASEAN. So I think Nicola Stern put it well in the Stern report, which is we don't know the science for sure, but we can take out a little bit of insurance. And he was, I think, a little bit more sensible than the people wanting to put in these, very strong Paris targets and things. I think we should. But
you're talking, but on Paris and on China, and India, Australia is looking at 2030. So is the UK. You have a look at some of the other countries like India and China. China is saying that they will be able to hit net zero 2060, and India 2070. In the meantime, China is building 2 coal-fired power stations each week, and India is building 2 each month. Where are they buying the coal from?
Well, that's a good question. And if you decided, look, it's better to face climate change as a rich economy than a poor economy. And so if Australia decides to go in really hard on these things, and as you say, China and India and Russia fill up the shortfall, the planet's not going to be better off and we're going to be poor. So I think for that reason, I think this does need a rethink, Aaron.
All right. The NRL is set for an exciting return to Las Vegas with promising news on the financial front. Chairman Peter V'landys announced that the league is nearly break-even in its second year in Vegas. The 2024 season saw record revenues and viewership driven by thrilling matches like the Sea Eagles, Rabbitohs and the Roosters Broncos doubleheader. V'landys emphasising that this year's venture shows potential for profit, countering claims of excessive costs. How excited are you about this match in Vegas? We have spoken previously on this show about the NFL and the NHL. Everyone's coming to Australia, and we are trying to export some of that power overseas. How do you think it's going?
Look, I think it's created a lot of excitement around the NRL. I know that it's a great thrill for the fans. You see the crowds there, mainly Australians going over there, I think, Aaron, rather than Americans. It's great for the league, great for the players, a good experience. I saw some of the players from Cronulla visiting the firefighters from Los Angeles that have fought the fires. So they're doing a lot of good, I think, in terms of, footy diplomacy for the NRL. I think in terms of ratings, it's obviously going to be watched more in Australia than the US. The NFL, American football, is the #1 sport, so they're not going to be all switching on to NRL just yet. But I think it's doing some good, probably for the game back home. And Peter V'landys has a real vision in terms of taking the NRL global and picking up sponsors and picking up some international dimension, I think.
Guess what the first code was that ESPN had as its regular baseline television service when it first began?
I'll say Aussie rules.
Correct. It was the AFL, and it was seen as, what is this thing happening at night time? And it did so well. Unfortunately for the NRL, it hasn't yet translated, as we say. This from The Guardian: the NRL's Las Vegas showcase has failed to win over American viewers after ratings showed just 61,000 tuned in to see the Rabbitohs take on the Sea Eagles in primetime Saturday night. The ratings for this year's season launch, which also show 44,000 for the later Roosters versus Broncos game, suggests the league has its work to do. Yet it is still making money. The old adage that you don't have to be watched anymore to be successful financially seems to be true when it comes to this. Do you think that they will be able to win over the Americans, or do you think this is more that great Australian idea that we love an Aussie idea, an Aussie that goes overseas. Is the NRL the Olivia Newton-John of today?
Love it, yeah. Peter V'landys is Olivia or John Travolta, I'm not sure, but look, it's quite clear that it's good to take the game overseas. I mean, the AFL's done it with David Koch taking Port Adelaide to China, and I covered a game between Collingwood and the Crows in the UAE. A lot of it's looking after expats in that case. I think also, Aaron, as we've said on this program, there's a bit of a war for talent. I mean, the Pacific Islanders could play rugby union, rugby league, or NFL in America, and we saw that with the NFL bringing their game to Melbourne in 2026. They're looking at an academy for talent on the Gold Coast. I think the importance of the Pacific and the West Coast of the United States and the sort of war for talent between the NRL, Super Rugby, and the NFL is quite a big one, and I think the NRL have got a keen eye on that.
I feel like what we're watching here is the beginning of something that in 10 years' time we'll look back on and say it was 2024, 2025 where this started, which is the globalization of everything, right? So if you think about the NHL and the NFL, why are they heading to the UK and to different countries and to Melbourne next year, as you mentioned? Because they are dealing with these television providers that are now global, right? You think of the tech companies that own these platforms now, they are global. Whereas Channel 7, Channel 9 was started in the 50s because they had a tower on a hill that could only get to so many people. And therefore the sports kind of followed that trajectory as well. Do you think that we are witnessing the transformation of sport, and similar to the streaming services, that it doesn't pay to be local and parochial, it pays to be global?
Well, I think the streaming, I mean, the NFL commissioner said the streaming's added enormous value, and the international games add $1 billion to its TV rights. So it's clearly there in terms of media. When I was a kid, Aaron, we watched South Australian National Football League, and we'd watch Victorian Football League for an hour on a Sunday on the ABC. So you never even saw football beyond your own state borders, let alone globally. So yeah, we have seen this transformation, and yet NRL and AFL are very popular, and they're very big domestic sports, and in some ways they're bigger here than the global sports of rugby union and soccer.
All right, interesting point you've just raised there. This will be my final question, I promise. When you talk there about the ABC used to have the rights to the VFL, they don't anymore. Why? Because the ABC could not afford to retain those rights. Are we witnessing at the beginning of local commercial television stations being unable to afford the rights to games that are kind of becoming bigger, right? You think about the chief sponsors of the AFL, they are the Coca-Colas and the McDonald's and the Toyotas of the world, global brands. And they have very much been connected to the Channel 7s and the Channel 9s over the years. Do you foresee a time where they won't be able to compete with the interest that we'll start seeing from global platforms like Amazon, Netflix even, that are now getting into sport, live sports, because they want advertisers and advertisers want sport? Do you think that we will start to see a shift in the way Australian sports media works?
I think to some degree, to some extent, that's true to some degree in terms of the globalisation of sports. But I still think local crowds and local communities make the sport strong. You see that with the GWS Giants have really tried. They're a good team. They've taken a long time to build up support in Western Sydney, whilst when you see a Port Adelaide come in, or Fremantle or West Coast Eagles or Adelaide Crows, they have an instant fan base, and I think we'll see that with Tasmania. So I think to some extent that's true, Aaron, but I do think you need good local grassroots support for a sport to remain strong, because it can't just rely just on streaming.
Professor Tim Harcourt, I throw a lot at you during these things and you bat them away so beautifully. It must be all that cricket you watch over the weekend. Appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Aaron. Enjoy it always. Thank you.